Hi, this is Stephanie with Iron Sharpening Iron. I am so glad to be on here today to share this video with you guys. I have really missed making videos the last few weeks. If you are just subscribed to Rumble, you will see I haven't done much recently, but there's actually been some stuff going on in the background, so I'll just go over that real quick. If you are subscribed to the Telegram channel, you have seen I've been making some posts on there. And a couple of big things. Ken has a YouTube channel that his son had established a while back that hadn't been used. And we have been uploading a lot of the video content on there. So if you know someone who can't stand Rumble or doesn't know how to use it or just loves YouTube, or maybe you feel that way, and there are some nice features for YouTube, you can subscribe to the Way to Life Now YouTube channel, and I'll be posting the link in the description below. Just note that not everything is going to be on that channel, and we have already been censored one day after putting Omicron video on the YouTube channel. It was taken down. So, and several other videos have been flagged. So just know that if you want all of the content, come over to Rumble. Also, Ken and I were approached by several people about starting a TikTok channel. So felt like the Father was calling us in this area. So I have started making short TikTok videos. They're really at this point just trailers for the other videos. So if you're interested in that, or if you'd like to just send a little trailer to try to get someone to come watch the videos, I'll put that in the description as well. All right, and now that we are done with announcements, we can get into this video. So originally I was expecting this video, which often happens, to be a one video, get it all done sort of thing. And as I started putting together this information, as usually happens, I realized that this would be just too much to cover in one video. Well, and I guess I'm just a little bit of a detailed person. I like to hit every point, don't like to leave a lot of stuff out. So I decided to do this series like this. So this is the snake cult, injection into our religion, our culture, and even our bodies. And so this was all inspired by the recent theory postulated by a certain doctor. And we are going to get into that theory in this video. We will not be getting into the deeper spiritual, religious, or any other implications. So with that, let's just kick this off. This will be a very information heavy video on this particular theory. So recent revelations. This picture is Dr. Bryan Ardis. He is a chiropractor, and he came out recently. If you saw the Watch the Water video, or if you watched the series with Mike Adams or some other interviews he's done out there, he proposed that snake venom-like compounds or a virus that has actually been spliced with venom-like peptides. Peptides are just proteins. So have been the cause of COVID-19. They have been the cause for why people who get remdesivir, so many of them seem to die. And the reason why maybe there's so many problems with these COVID shots. So we're going to get into that theory. And he proposed that the method of delivery for this may be via the water supply. And he admits himself that's the least important part of his argument. That's what people have latched onto a lot, but we're going to get into all the particulars, the proofs on all these different things. I watched probably at least 15 hours of videos and interviews and trying to piece all this stuff together. So you don't have to, and give you my own opinion on these things. I do not believe that every conclusion Dr. Ardis reaches is accurate based on personal experience and different things, but I think it's worth looking at this theory. It's got some intriguing points to it for sure, but you know what? Do your own research, come to your own conclusions here. So this sounds pretty crazy, sounds really out there. Is there actually any proof to what Dr. Ardis is saying? I mean, is this just some kind of crazy conspiracy theory, or is there something to back this up? So let's get into his argument here. First of all, he pointed out the PCR test itself was actually invented to identify snake envenomation. That's when you get poisoned by being bit by a snake. It's actually invented to test for that. So that's interesting. And also, Dr. Bing Liu is a researcher that was trying to sequence the genetics of the spike protein. And he had been working on this for 5 months. And just as he was about to release his results, he dies mysteriously. And the same story with another researcher, James Taylor. So, is this just coincidence that he died at this time? Or is somebody trying to hide something that he was discovering in his research? Also, fairly early on in the COVID pandemic, the genetic sequencing of the actual antibodies that came from infected patients in Wuhan were sequenced, and they found that they most closely resembled the Chinese crate snake, which is a poisonous snake, venomous snake, and the king cobra, not bats. Although bats was one of the top things it did identify with in this study, but it wasn't the most closely related. And it had been pointed out early in the pandemic that bats were not a likely vector, as they are actually hibernating at the time that the virus became a problem. So, interesting. Also, phospholipase enzymes. So, what the heck does that mean, Stephanie? Those are enzymes, things that break things apart. What does this break apart and do? It breaks apart phospholipids. That's the outer membrane of your cells. Every cell in your body has an outer layer. It's like the skin on your cells. It dissolves the skin to your body's cells. That's what a phospholipase enzyme does. It is a marker when these levels are high for COVID and snake bites, specifically this SPLA2. But note, this is raised in other conditions, so this alone is not necessarily anything. But it is interesting to note it was originally discovered in cobra venom. In Costa Rica, they were testing snake venom antibodies or antivenom as a treatment for COVID. And you can actually find quite a few articles talking about snake venom or snake antivenom being used as a treatment for COVID. So, interesting. And then there's this interesting article that says snake bites and COVID-19, two crises, one research and development opportunity. So what in the world do snake bites and COVID-19 have in so much common that it's one research and development opportunity? Now, I didn't take the time to read that article, but if anyone can answer that question, please do in the comments below. But they seem like pretty different things to me. Then the antivenom market actually grew during the COVID pandemic, and somehow there's an increase in snake bites during lockdown. So that just raises some questions. Is this just cover for something else they were doing with this antivenom? Then research in April of 2020 showed the spike protein was actually most like snake venom. Wow, maybe we're getting onto a little something here. And synthetic snake venom peptides, just so you know, have been mass produced since 1989. So Dr. Ardis is not saying that they took a bunch of king cobra snakes and got the venom out of those snakes and put that in the water. No, that would be incredibly time consuming and crazy. But they have been making it in a lab. So he is proposing synthetically produced peptides were either put in the water or somehow it was spliced into this virus or as part of the virus. All right, then a study was done in October 2021 that showed that patients that test positive for COVID have toxin-like compounds like those of animal venom in their blood, feces, and urine, while those who test positive do not. So this is definitely stronger evidence here. There were 36 toxins found, and 20 of them actually are snake peptides, including from the crates and cobras we've already mentioned. So pretty interesting. Why do they have those compounds in their blood, their feces, and their urine? I don't think any researchers have really attempted to answer this question too well yet. And in Australia, they found that heating up snake venom with microwaves increases the toxic effects in humans. So I'm sure most people have heard this idea that 5G is the cause of COVID. It's not a virus, it's not snake venom. It's just the electromagnetic waves created by 5G that Wuhan and New York City and these places in Italy and all these places, at least initially in the pandemic, where they were having these huge outbreaks, also had 5G there, or the greatest 5G networks established. So that was actually causing the pandemic. I never really bought into that theory, but always thought it was a possibility that it could be amplifying whatever else was going on in some way. So this shows a possible connection where 5G and snake venom, when you have them put together, there's an additive effect on human beings. So interesting. All in a name. So it was said very early on that the naming of this virus would be extremely important. And I'm sure we all remember how much debate and arguing there was over the name of this virus, right? Because, like every other virus in human history, essentially has been named for the place that it originated. And Wuhan was quickly thrown out as the name for the Wuhan coronavirus was thrown out as the name for this virus. Why were they so opposed to it? All of a sudden, it was racist to say where a virus originated. But they came up with this name, COVID-19. Why? So in January 2020, as this pandemic is just starting to begin, a study comes out that is funded by Genentech, which we'll be talking more about later, that studied king cobra venom and found that there were 19 toxins found in king cobra venom. And of course, they called it COVID-19, right? Could that be for these 19 venom specific toxins? Especially given the fact that the virus really, we didn't hear anything about it until 2020. Although I guess they say a little bit started at the end of 2019, but it seems like in general it was the virus of 2020. Then we have the word coronavirus, and the word corona means crowned, and the word virus is from the Latin word for venom. And who's crowned? The kings, the queens, the princes, right? So this could be king cobra venom, or I think more likely the corona there is referring to the kings of this earth, the elites, or the princes of the power of the air and etc. that rule behind those people. They're the crowned ones who are releasing this venom on the people. Note that this is not the first coronavirus, and coronaviruses have been discovered, since the 1970s or so. But that's not to say they haven't been creating things like this since that time, possibly. The official narrative, though, is that because looking at these viruses under a microscope, when you have it highly magnified, it has this crowned-like appearance. So why some but not others? One perplexing part of this whole COVID pandemic is why certain groups of people were impacted so much more than others. So it is interesting to note that all the substances that were found helpful in COVID-19 patients, outside of the hospital protocol, like vitamins, NAC, glutathione, corticosteroids, antibiotics, ivermectin, chloroquines, melatonin, chlorine dioxide solution, or CDS, and zinc, are also helpful against snake envenomation. Vitamin C levels are also higher in the blood of women than men. And we saw during the pandemic that men were more likely to die of COVID than women. So this could be a possible explanation. Vitamin C actually helps with that enzyme we keep talking about, this SPLA2. Also, a study was done on rats and found that snake venom at sublethal doses is particularly harmful to those with underlying conditions. And we saw that people with certain underlying conditions like diabetes and underlying heart disease, they were more likely to succumb to COVID. Children also have higher natural melatonin levels, and melatonin's been shown to be protective against COVID. And melatonin is also protective against snake venom. So, could this be the reason why children have done better than adults in general when it comes to COVID? Finally, nicotine is a known antidote for the diaphragm paralysis and other effects of certain snake bites. And it was discovered in April of 2020 that smokers of all these different conditions were the least impacted by COVID. Note as well that in the same month that this was discovered, Dr. Fauci and our health director come on to one of these press briefings that Trump was holding every day about COVID and said that people should stop smoking and urged especially minorities to stop smoking and said it was the number one risk factor for COVID morbidity and mortality. And let me be clear, I am not suggesting that anyone go out and start smoking. It has a lot of ill health effects, and Dr. Ardis didn't either. He did suggest maybe you could chew Nicorette gum, although that also has a lot of toxic chemicals in it, or try nicotine patches, possibly if you didn't have any other underlying conditions that nicotine could exacerbate and you know that you were sick and you were exposed to COVID, you could try nicotine patches, pray about that, but not suggesting anyone go out there and smoking. But it is an interesting correlation with the snake venom. So let's talk a little bit about symptoms. Venoms generally can cause all the health complications seen with COVID-19. Now, that in of itself doesn't mean that much because when you try to look at viruses and you do differential diagnoses and all these things for different diseases, you realize that a lot of diseases have a lot of things in common. So that in of itself is not that telling. But let's look a little more into this. Snake venom can destroy white blood cells, and the white blood cells are the part of your blood that's produced in your bones that protects your body from viruses, bacteria, parasites, all these attacks from the outside. It's for your immune system. So there have been reports of people having AIDS-like condition after having multiple injections of these shots. So could there be a correlation there? It's worth exploring. There are also reports of people shedding their skin after injections, which he mentioned, but I will say that this is a known syndrome. It's called Stevens-Johnson syndrome. It happens even when people take ibuprofen. So is there a snake correlation? I don't know. You could say there's a pharmaceutical correlation for sure, because it seems to happen after people take pharmaceuticals of different kinds. They just have this horrible allergic reaction and their body just goes haywire essentially. So, but we do know snakes shed their skin. So they mentioned that in the video, but I'd say that's a pretty weak point. Crate venom can cause permanent neurological damage, including loss of taste or smell. Now, this one to me is a little bit stronger because it always baffled me. Why is this virus causing loss of taste and smell? I mean, and not just like a little bit while your nose is stopped up, which, nasal congestion was not even a major symptom of COVID, at least initially. So why are people losing their taste and smell? And then it goes on for like months and months afterwards. But it is found that crate venom has been tested, and I thought he mentioned cobra venom as well. I mean, you put people sucking venom out of people's arm who have been bit, and then they lose their sense of taste, or they taste something that they shouldn't, like it tastes terrible, even though it's like, a bowl of ice cream. It tastes sweet and lovely, and it would taste horrible. So why are people having these symptoms? It's such a strange thing for a virus. But there is a venom connection there, so interesting. So let's talk about remdesivir. The first time I actually ever came across Dr. Ardis, he was coming out and pointing out that in the clinical studies on remdesivir, that there was this high rate of acute kidney injury and other things that occurred. And so he felt that people were being killed in the hospital basically with the remdesivir specifically. one issue I have with that is that people were actually coming into the hospital with acute kidney injury already. So I don't think we can attribute all these deaths, all the acute kidney injuries to remdesivir, as it was being administered after they already developed that. But it certainly, in my experience, was a very ineffective drug, and I personally would not take it or advise my family members to take it if they were hospitalized with COVID. I must say that if COVID-19, this disease that we're familiar with, is just venom put in the water or a virus spliced with venom, then that would explain how they could have had acute kidney injury coming into the hospital. And then when they're given remdesivir, it just increases the toxic effect if it's a similar venom as was placed in the water. So why people would have even more kidney injury after having remdesivir. However, Dr. Ardis is basing his conclusions off of the old studies done on remdesivir, and the studies done during COVID actually didn't show much effect on the kidney injury versus the control group. So, and not everybody who was in the hospital really got remdesivir, especially if they already had acute kidney injury, then it was considered contraindicated. They weren't getting remdesivir, at least later on in the pandemic, not sure about earlier. I really appreciate Dr. Ardis and all his information he's come out with, but just realize that he's not a medical doctor and he was not working in the hospital, boots on the ground, seeing what was going on in there. So he comes to a lot of good conclusions, did some great research, but just not everything really lines up with what we saw in the hospital. But moving on, what does remdesivir have to do with the snake venom? So Gilead's remdesivir, so Gilead is the company that manufactures remdesivir, requires monitoring of patients' prothrombin time. So prothrombin time is a measure of how coagulable your blood is, how quickly it clots when it's exposed to air. So snake venoms are known for causing issues with coagulation. So could there be snake venom in remdesivir that is requiring us to monitor this prothrombin time? Well, it's possible, but honestly, a lot of drugs require monitoring of coagulation, so that on itself is pretty weak. Remdesivir is cardiotoxic also through the same mechanism via the mitochondria as cobra venom. Okay, that's interesting, maybe. Then Gilead acquired facilities and a bunch of executives from this Genentech we mentioned before that came out with that COBRA study back in 2011. And that is actually when that study began. Genentech also has multiple patented drugs derived from snake venom components. So the facilities that they actually acquired were biologic facilities. So they're dealing with biologics, like snake venom would be a biologic. So is it a possibility that they acquired snake venom like stuff and that's what they are using in this remdesivir? Possible. Let's talk a little more about Genentech. Stanley Cohen was the founder of this company. Stanley Cohen. Now, any of you people out there who know a little bit about Hebrew know the word Cohen is the word for priest. This is anyone with this last name is supposed to be of the Aaronic priestly line. They are a Cohen. They're a priest. So this priest was the first person to make a hybridized human cell, where they took human DNA and they mixed some bacterial DNA and put it in there and created a chimeric hybrid human cell. Whoa. Just had to add that in there about the Genentech. But getting back to remdesivir connections, this enzyme that we've mentioned several times before, this SPLA2, is associated with COVID and also snake bites. It can cause multi-organ failure, and this was the #1 serious adverse event from remdesivir. And it can also cause acute renal injury. So it can cause two of these things that remdesivir was shown to cause. And the only contraindicated drug to use with remdesivir is hydroxychloroquine. And in 2005, it was found that hydroxychloroquine stops snake venom effects on the nicotine receptors in the brain. And remember the nicotine connection we've drawn here. So very interesting. They also mentioned that the snake venom, when it's put in a bottle, it's like this powdered stuff. It's white or yellow, and then you mix it with saline in order to reconstitute it. But honestly, that's basically any drug in the hospital is white or yellow powder that you mix with saline or some kind of water solution to administer to patients. So that's pretty weak, unless you're going to say that every antibiotic and everything else, steroids, all that given in the hospital is also some form of snake venom. I'd say it's unlikely. I would say overall, this evidence for remdesivir being snake venoms is fairly weak, but it's going to be really hard to test until Gilead gives us vials to look at. But I would say, hey, it's worth exploring. Let's move on to snake bites or shots. So a Houston doctor was nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize or Nobel Prize for this patent-free COVID shot, Corbevax, and you can find the articles about that. What's interesting about that is that this shot was actually created in India by a company called Biological E, and they started using it in December of 2019. Yes, you heard me. December 2019, before COVID was a problem. Somehow they already had the solution for that. And note that Biological E makes snake antivenom as well. That is very intriguing information there. Also, one of the 5 causes of elevated D-dimer that this doctor over in, I believe, British Columbia found that his patients, after they took the shots, if they tested the blood in like the first 7 to 10 days, like a large proportion, more than 50%, I forget the exact statistics, had elevated D-dimer, and snake envenomation is actually one of the 5 causes listed in Medscape for causing elevated D-dimer. So could it be that there was snake venom in these shots that was causing the elevated D-dimer? It's a possibility. And it was found by Karen Kingston as she was delving into the patents that this PLA enzyme was actually found in all of the COVID shots. Wow, that is interesting. And in 2017, the NIH, the National Institute of Health, filed a vaccine nanotechnology patent that says that the shot can deliver a, quote, toxin or agent of biowarfare. I looked at this myself. Whoa, wait a second. Why would you make a vaccine with nanotechnology to deliver a toxin or an agent of biowarfare? Whoa, this raises serious questions for Dr. Fauci and the NIH. So now we're going to make some more connections here. So the 2 people credited with the invention of these mRNA COVID shots, Mr. Wiseman and Dr. Carrico, were funded by who? The NIH and the NIADH. Big surprise there, right? Well, we need to look a little bit closer at this Weissman and Carrico and what they have been doing with the technology that Dr. Malone started back in the 1980s or whatever. So they were actually studying and found that they could use snake venom mRNA to get into the cells of animals. That's right, snake venom mRNA. There's mRNA inside of snake venom. Now, the mRNA in these COVID shots are allegedly synthetically created, but so is all this snake venom, right? That's been done since the 1980s. They also found that snake venom was an extremely stable medium for preserving mRNA, and it actually would preserve it for over 30 years, which is really shocking with the properties of snake venom that it would preserve mRNA in it, as it's such a like caustic, awful substance. And this was a study that was completed in 2012, but those vials had been preserved since the 1980s. And note that this mRNA was actually extracted from the venom itself. In 2014, these researchers found that they could make it even more stable by wrapping it in a nanoparticle hydrogel, aka lipid nanoparticles that are part of the COVID shot. And then in 2015, they combined it with dynabeads. Well, what the heck is that? These are these magnetic little beads. And remember how there were all these videos or reports of people becoming magnetic after they took the shots. And there's actually studies as well that you can find about magnetofection, that they were using the magnetism as a way to infect your cells. I mean, that's what this mRNA does. It has to get into your cell to do its work. And they were combining it with magnetic beads. This laid the foundation for what they've rolled out these last couple years. July 2021, Moderna's co-founder was suggesting that we could use mRNA technology to treat venomous snake bites. Moderna has never made any other successful drug except for those shots. And now they want to jump into snake bites with their mRNA. And this led him to be an advisor for Ophirex, a company with Department of Defense funding. Red flag, registered in Delaware. Double red flag, you know where our supposed president is from. And man, so many companies. If y'all dive into Delaware, you see, I've started noticing lately, a lot of these places go back to Delaware. And this company, Ophirex, is trying to make a pill for snake bites. Interesting, they're making also these little COVID pills recently to try and help with COVID, right? Not saying this company, but is there a connection? I don't know. But Ophirex has also had an award from the Wellcome Trust, which is tied to the World Economic Forum, which I went a bit into in my Beast Part 4 video. These are evil, cabal, elitists at the top. And guess what? The pill works through inhibiting the SBLA2, that same enzyme we keep talking about. So, interesting. Now maybe we could see why COVID and the snake bites, they have one common research development issue, right? It's this SBLA2. Maybe that's the answer to the riddle there. And Karen Kingston also found that the coronavirus spike proteins were patented in early 2019 by the NIAID. You know that part of our federal government that's part of the NIH that Dr. Anthony Fauci is the head of, and Moderna. The company that Dr. Fauci said, oh, they're the ones, they're going to create the solution for the problem. Yeah, because they were the ones that created the problem in the first place, maybe? I mean, gosh, they had a patent before the thing was even released. Whatever it is, snake venom, virus, 5G, whatever, they have patents for it before this even came about. And some other things they found in those patents. According to the patents, it really was a virus, and it is a combination of HIV and rabies and snake venom, all kind of spliced together in this coronavirus. And that is what they have unleashed on the population. That's just from the patents. So dig it into yourself, pray about it, come to your own conclusion. But I would really like to see Dr. Fauci on the stand answering about why there are these patents out there. Wow, those are a lot of crazy connections here.
Let's connect some more dots here. If these shots are causing people to create the spike protein, and the spike protein, according to the patents, contains snake venom-like peptides, and from previous studies I've shown in other videos, it's even getting into your DNA and your liver. Your body is being modified to become a snake venom factory. You're becoming like a snake. It's pretty crazy. And not only that, there's all these doctors who have been talking about people, shedding? I mean, we've been talking about shedding of the skin. I'm like, yeah, not really, but are they shedding snake venom and getting other people sick? Now, I personally cannot attest to that theory. But but there are so many people reporting issues with this. I think it's something we really need to look into, especially when they're having like irregular menstrual periods and things. And yes, there could be something else going on in the environment. Like, we've been talking about, or I mentioned 5G. I mean, maybe it's the 5G that's causing the issues. It's just getting blamed on the shots because it's all rolling out kind of the same time frame. But it's definitely something worth investigating. And I don't know about y'all, but I don't want to be creating snake venom in my body. And hopefully, I'm praying that this is a temporary effect if all this is true. Oh, pray for everyone.
Continuing, you have been programmed. So, Dr. Ardis pointed out that through a crazy series of events, he ended up watching this TV show, The Blacklist, Season 4, Episode 15. Add 4 plus 15, you have 19, COVID-19. And this show came out in 2017, a couple years before this pandemic started. And the man in the show is poisoned. He has the same symptoms as COVID. I watched this clip a few times, and I swear he says something about corona death, which doesn't make any sense in the context of the show, why he would say that. Go watch it for yourself. Figure out. If he's saying something else, please let me know, because that's all I could understand when he's in the pharmacy with the other lady trying to get steroids. A crate peptide is suspected, the venomous snake that's most related to this COVID spike protein. And there's only one source in the show of this peptide, which is Scranton, Pennsylvania, where the University of Pennsylvania is, which is where these mRNA shot creators worked that we already mentioned, Mr. Weissman and Ms. Carrico. And the method of delivery that he is given this poison is through a drink. So let's talk a little bit more about the drink. And I'll just say, I've mentioned before, Hollywood programs you for what they're going to do. They consider it part of karma that they have to tell you what they're going to do to you before they do it. So that is a reason why the controllers, the evil people in this world, would tell you in a TV show what they're going to do. Is this proof that this is what has happened? No, but it's interesting to know. So, Watch the Water. That is the name of the Stu Peters documentary. If you watched it, great. Then you already heard a lot of this stuff, so probably not everything I'm going to bring up here. So let's talk about the water connection part. The CDC has been monitoring wastewater since the beginning of pandemic, and that is predictive of outbreaks. And this is not isolated to America either. And they didn't tell anybody they were doing this. They've been testing this wastewater, looking for COVID, and they say it's predictive that if they see a bunch of COVID-19 showing up in the wastewater, then that means there's going to be an outbreak soon. Now, Dr. Ardis takes us to think that, well, it's after the outbreak, and that doesn't make logical sense. But when you see it in the light that people catch COVID, but it's 2 or 3 weeks before they end up in the hospital. So, I could see how it could be predictive of an outbreak, even if it's found in their wastewater, without it meaning that, it's snake venom in the water that they put in beforehand or something of that sort. But anyways, then in 2015, there was a study where rats were given cobra venom in drinking water, and they exhibited the same symptoms as COVID-19. And there have been people saying, oh, venom doesn't hurt you if you're in water. This theory is bunk. But I'm sorry, they make medications from cobra venom and different venoms. So if it can't work if you take it by mouth, how do these pills do anything? It must have biological effects when swallowed by mouth. Or, usually you take your pills with water, right? It'd be mixed with water. So obviously that doesn't actually play out in reality. It's just an unknown, and they don't test it because who wants to drink snake venom to see what happens to them? Nobody, right? Because that would be crazy. That's why they don't tell you they make drugs out of snake venom, although it may have some great biological effects for you if you have high blood pressure or you have a clotting disorder or whatever. But moving on. The Chinese scientist, this lady that was brought to America that was testifying to Congress and whoever about gain of function research in Wuhan, she was asked, how do they test out their gain of function products? And she said that they would put it in water and they would freeze it and deliver this ice to the locals in different areas and see what happens. And then they'd bring them the antidote and fix them after they made them sick. Now, this is a secondhand information from the bodyguard of Dr. Ardis, who had actually worked on protection for this lady. But I'd say that's pretty interesting. And everyone in Dr. Ardis's experience that has reported never having COVID have all been on well water. You know, even if you purify your drinking water at home or you only drink Ozarka or whatever, most people are still taking a shower or a bath, or you go to a restaurant and you drink the water there. They cook the food in the water and whatnot. You have some kind of exposure. But people on a well water would not have that exposure as long as they stay at home and only use that water. So that could explain why these people have not had COVID. Again, that on its own is pretty weak evidence, but we need to take all of this evidence, all these little points, and analyze it and put it together and see what kind of picture it paints. Is this worthy of our attention and our time? And so I had seen all this and I was like, wow, this is really intriguing. I think he's onto something. I have a dream back in 2019 that I'll share for the next video related to all this. And I was like, man, I really want to make a video about all this. And I was ready to do that a couple weeks ago. But I was making the first fruits video and I prayed about it. And y'all said, no, not yet. You know, finish what you're doing. And I felt like I was supposed to keep watching to wait and see if more information became available, more evidence to prove this theory. And in fact, a lot of the Karen Kingston and the patents information came out later. Some of the things about why different people that I've already shared came out later. So it was fruitful to wait and get more evidence to really test this thing out better. And then we saw this help from down under. Now, I don't mean Australia here, but from South Africa, they're still down under, right? Dr. Bat, who is a naturopath, found that there were snake venom like substances in the shots, or what appeared to be. So, this was on the Dr. Jane Ruby show. She works with Stu Peters. And I will show y'all these slides here with these deals that this is a snake venom peptide. And this is something she found in the shots that previously she had no idea what it was. She couldn't figure it out. But after seeing Dr. Ardis's theory, she went and tested it out, searched to see what these things look like, and was like, wow, this actually does look like what she was already seeing in these shots that she couldn't explain before. Then she took some of her blood and took a drop of the Pfizer shot and put it in her blood. And you can see the video that her blood just totally coagulates and looks just like the blood of somebody who was exposed to snake venom, that it had the same kind of reaction. So this is definitely getting more intriguing. Is this 100% evidence? No, I mean, maybe those substances she saw in there was something else. It just happens to look a lot like snake venom. But taking all this evidence in together, this warrants further investigation. So Pierre Kory, I have a lot of respect for him. He's definitely helped a lot of people with his ICU protocols, saving people from COVID who are really in dire straits. He has a lot of very good experience. He's an intensivist. He works with respiratory problems in the ICU. He knows a lot. And I recommend anybody who wants to fully test this out, go read his commentary on all this, go read his criticisms, but with an eye of your own. You know, we shouldn't just listen to anybody and take everything that they say, including me. Don't take anything I say at face value. Go and test it out for yourself. It is very apparent from Dr. Kory's write-up that he is not very conspiratorial. He doesn't understand why the fact that all these things have been fact-checked means that it's probably true. But any of us who have been on the right side of things, or I don't know, the leftists say we're on the wrong side of things, we have experienced that whenever they're trying to fact-check us, it's whenever you're trying to tell the truth about something that they don't want you to get the truth out about. So the fact that the snake connection with this has been debunked and fact checked over and over, it's a proof in my book, and it's a proof in Dr. Ardis's book. But Dr. Kory doesn't see that. And it's also very obvious that Dr. Kory is not looking at this from a spiritual perspective. So that's really what I want to dive into next, is the spiritual look at this. And so we'll be coming on here, Ken and I together, talking about, how does this relate to Bible prophecy? How does this relate to the Bible generally? What is the history of snakes and culture and how it's been used in religion? There's a lot more to this than what we're just seeing here on the surface of these revelations. And I'm sure Dr. Ardis is getting more and more information from more people putting the pieces together. And we'll see, if this hypothesis of his plays out, if we're able to gather enough information. But anyhow, I just wanted to give you a background on what his hypothesis is and all his proofs so you can test it out for yourself. And then next time we dig into the meat and potatoes, the spiritual applications of all this. So y'all stay tuned for that. Please subscribe, comment as you would like, and shalom.